Hello, this is Andrea Whiteley from Perth, Western Australia. You're listening to Smart Talk. The Mike Nowak Show starts in 3, 2, 1.
It's Christmas!
Oh yeah, Christmas, all happening now, innit? It's all happening. December.
Prime time!
For sellotape and scissors. So these two really come into their own, isn't it? You all, by the way, everyone in this room has sellotape and scissors, and you think you know where they are. They're probably not there. Because they're always on the move. You're sitting there going, I actually know where my sellotape and scissors are, but no, not when you want them, not when you bloody want them! Not the opening in the drawer. I thought they were, who's moved the scissors? They move on their own, the scissors. They're crafty little bastards. And the sellotape, as soon as you leave the sellotape unattended, it will wind itself up when you're not looking. Sometimes you give up. I'm not going to look for the scissors anymore. I'm going to buy new scissors. I don't care. I don't need to spend my whole life looking for scissors. I'm going to get new scissors. You think you've won. You think you've won, don't you? You get your new scissors. I've got some new scissors. Forget the old scissors. I'm not going to spend my whole life looking for those babies. Here's my new scissors. Then you realise that the scissors come in a plastic packaging that closely covers the scissors. And you can't get in unless you have scissors. The very thing you need is staring at you through the plastic window.
It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Green, gardening, and environment radio. Flavored with a dash of humor. Welcome to intelligent, irreverent talk about plants and the planet they grow on. Your questions, comments, and participation are always welcome at 877-711-5611.
Good planets are hard to find. Temperate zones and tropic climes. And true currents and thriving seas. Wind blowing through breathing trees. Strong ozone and safe sunshine. Well, good planets are hard to find. Good planets are in demand.
This hour is brought to you by Bartlett Tree Experts. Every tree needs a champion. Go to bartlett.com.
Jet streams, perfect air.
And here they are, Peggy Malecki and Mike Nowak.
Well, good planets are in demand. Right.
All right, and I'm just watching Facebook here.
Yep.
And watching people get online one by one.
It's working.
Oh, and there's another. Look at this. She fixed them. Peggy, we had a bell. We had a bell emergency. We had
Bell down!
dinger down. No, it's a dinger down. Dinger down. And I thought, oh, we're going to have to go with just one dinger today. And, I was thinking we might take the dinger and we just might put it on top of the garbage bin outside and have the scrap guys come by. And, well, are we okay? 90 seconds. You're going to be 90 seconds. We just got here. Okay, Andrew. And we could put it out there and have the scrap guys come and take it away. Or we could fix it.
Which we did.
Which Peggy did. I looked at it and went, okay, I'll go with one dinger today. But no, Peggy,
Woohoo!
fix the dinger. And that brings to mind the book we're going to talk about today because it's an important book. You should pick this up. Secondhand Travels in the New Global Garage Sale by Adam Minter, author of Junkyard Planet. This is a guy who knows more about recycling than probably anybody on the planet right now. And I have been trying to talk to this guy for 2 years, trying to get him on the show, and we finally did because he's not in Malaysia right now or Kuala Lumpur, or he hangs out there a lot, Singapore away.
This book brought him all over the planet.
I know. He's all over the planet talking about how the world reacts to secondhand stuff and to stuff in general. And it's so
stuff no one wants.
It's so appropriate to talk about it at this time of the year because
It's Christmas!
that's sometimes fun. All right, the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We'll be back with Adam Minter. Stick around. This is going to be a good conversation.
Oh boy. Where did you find that?
I was cruising the inner tubes and looking for Christmas stuff and found Chewbacca singing singing Silent Night. So I thought I'd throw that into the
why
mix
not?
here. Well, it's not as bad as some of the stuff he's going to get here on the program. Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki and the guy on the Skype from Minneapolis who has to deal with all of that right now as an introduction to his segment is Adam Minter. I mentioned him in the first segment. He's the author of Junkyard Planet and now Secondhand, travels in the new global garage sale or garage sale, as we say some places on the planet. And you should know that Adam is a columnist at Bloomberg Opinion. He writes about China, technology, the environment. I've been following his stuff for several years. He's also got a website called ShanghaiScrap.com. And I've been trying to get him on the program for a couple of years. The problem is mainly Adam, and good morning, by the way, Adam.
Good morning.
You're usually on the other side of the planet. You don't. Your base is no longer Minneapolis, where you grew up, but you migrated over to Malaysia, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, those areas. Why is that?
Well, in 2002, I actually moved to Shanghai, China, and that was to start covering the global recycling trade from over there. And for a number of years, I spent my time covering the globalization of waste and recycling. And we all know the story about how our recycling, so much of it is imported by China for being made into new raw materials and new products that get shipped back to us. So I spent 12 years there. And then in 2014, 12 years is a long time to spend as in one place as a journalist. So we migrated down to Malaysia, Southeast Asia, where I've been based since.
Amazing. It's a world that I would imagine is very different from what you see here in the United States.
Well, just on a physical level, I'm in Minnesota right now looking out at a snowbank, and in Malaysia, it's all tropics all the time. So, just in terms of climate, it's very different. But it's emerging markets. It's people pulling themselves up, entering the middle class, with all the good that comes with that. It's a country on the make, and it's a really exciting place to be.
And an exciting place to be if you're covering this particular topic, this issue, which you have done before. Give us the elevator speech about your first book, Junkyard Planet.
Well, Junkyard Planet was about the stuff that goes into recycling bins, both in homes and in factories. And I wanted to show people that globalization of our recycling, people buying it and importing it in other countries, isn't such a bad thing. In fact, on balance, it's good for the environment. There are problems with it, but it's something that we shouldn't run away from. It's actually a more efficient way for us to use all of our resources.
And I want to get into that before we get to the new book, just very quickly, because this is something I've been hoping to talk to you about for a couple of years. You mentioned China, and we know there was the green sword and the green fence, right. And some folks in the United States got upset because they said China is not taking our junk anymore. What the heck is the matter with those people? And of course, I turn to them and say, what makes you think that China is required to take our junk? What has been the effect of that in the last few years?
Well, let me back up, 2 steps, if you don't mind.
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
the reason China imported all of that recycling is because it needed it. One big misconception out there is that recycling is dumped on developing countries, but that's not how global trade works. You can't just put a shipping container on a boat and send it somewhere and tell the shipping company to go and dump it off. It doesn't work that way. Somebody has to pay for it and be the consignee. And what I always tell people in my talks about recycling is recycling follows manufacturing. manufacturing. It's not recyclable unless somebody wants to make something more from it. And the reason China imported all that recycling is it's the world's biggest manufacturer, so it wanted to make stuff from it. But as China becomes more affluent, it starts throwing away more stuff of its own, it generates its own recycling. And so as sort of a trade protection measure, the government started talking a few years about limiting the amount of recycling that comes in, especially the lower quality stuff, so that they could manufacture better and better stuff from it. So what that ends up meaning is that, the U.S., if we just restrict it to the U.S., but the U.S. is by no means the only country that exports. More than 100 countries around the world export recycling. The U.S. then has to find somebody else to manufacture stuff from the stuff we put in our recycling bin. And, many people don't realize this. We've seen a lot of coverage of Malaysia importing it where I live. But actually, the number one importer in terms of value of U.S. recycling right now is Canada, because they can manufacture from it. And so that's sort of an undercovered story that I'll probably get to sometime in the next year or two.
I was not aware of that myself. But something else that you say often, and I have used when I talk about this subject to groups and on the radio, is the idea that recycling is dead. Some people have written that story. That story has been written a number of times in the past few years. Recycling's dead. It doesn't work anymore. It's not profitable. We need to find a new model, and you debunk that every single time.
Yeah, it is profitable. I mean, nobody goes and plays in your trash because it's fun. You have to pay somebody to do it. And people have been doing this since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And arguably, they've been recycling since Paul Revere went around, Boston and its suburbs looking for silver that he could melt down into new silver that, you see now in museums. Recycling is as old as industrialization. It's still profitable, but like any commodity-based business, and I always encourage my environmental friends to think of recycling as a business, not just as an environmental good, but as a business. It's a commodity business. Your scrap aluminum cans compete with people digging holes in the ground. And like any commodity business, it has its ups and downs. And when I researched Junkyard Planet, you would see it go through these cycles. And right now it's going through a downturn. But the fact of the matter is, it's usually cheaper to reuse something than it is to go dig a hole or cut down a tree or dig an oil well. And because of that, you're going to see recycling persist. It's not dead. It will continue.
There you go. Write that down, folks. Send that out, Ellie. Make that a tweet and get that out there right away. The Adam Minter says recycling is not dead. All right. And it's appropriate, I think, that you're talking to us at this time of the year. The date today is December 8th. We're coming up on Christmas. And it's a stuff when junk. I will not say junk. Stuff. Yeah, I was going to say stuff
in every form imaginable
is out there to be bought and sold and given away, and sometimes last less than a day, used less than a day, and moved somewhere else. Maybe recycled, maybe turned over to somebody else. It's
maybe put in the basement.
Or an attic. And that's what you write about in Secondhand, Travels in the New Global Garage Sale. One of the things I was struck by in the book is the idea that there is no consistent model across the planet for how people view secondhand stuff. It depends on the culture. It depends on the history. And you write about that and how different people look differently at secondhand goods. For instance, Japan is switching in that direction, is moving in that direction, but for the longest time was interested only in new stuff, right?
Right. Well, I mean, the other key part of how secondhand is viewed is also economic circumstance. Of course, people at different economic levels will view it differently. But yes, Japan is a particular interest of mine in this book. I wanted to go there because they are sort of a glimpse to the future for many wealthy countries. Japan had an extraordinary period of affluence in the middle part of the 20th century, and that generation that enjoyed that affluence, they bought a lot of stuff. They kept it in their homes. Their homes are smaller than ours, but they like their stuff as much as Americans do. And now something very interesting is happening. Like many affluent societies, the birth rate has started declining. In fact, Japan is in a negative population growth phase. So there's just fewer people to take that stuff and reuse it, to want it. They don't have very many children there. Family size is shrinking. And so one of the things I wanted to do is figure out, where is all that stuff that's being left behind by this generation that's downsizing, passing away? Where is it going? And so I actually ended up following quite a bit of it around Southeast Asia, around even into Africa, and I started looking at how they're handling it in Japan, and it's looked at in many cases in Japan as both a burden, but it's also looked at as a great economic opportunity.
And you write about the new culture, the secondhand culture in Japan, these companies that will go in and clean out what's
Right.
left from, describe how that works in Japan.
Sure. Well, because you have this problem of these shrinking families, aging people with very few or no children, you have this question of who is going to clean up the estate, who is going to distribute it, sell it off, recycle it,
Who
throw it
wants
out.
it?
And who wants it. And so what has happened is you have the clean out industry in Japan. And that's basically, thousands of small businesses around Japan that compete to go into people's homes, literally go through the things and segregate them into piles, if you will. This one will go in the trash. This one will go to recycling. This can be sold to what they call recycle shops there. And the recycle shops, more often than not, some of them will put some of the things on their retail shelves, but a lot of them specialize in exporting the stuff to other countries. And it's a booming business, and it's a booming service that people need because there just aren't enough people in Japan to use all this stuff, and there just aren't enough heirs and friends even to clean it out. And it's not just Japan, of course. I also describe in the book how a form of this industry has emerged in the United States too for similar reasons.
And by the way, I should mention, and again, the name of the book is Secondhand Travels in the New Global Garage Sale. That's Adam Minter on the. Is it Skype or Zoom today, Andrew?
It's
Skype.
It's Skype.
Skype.
Okay. And you're
So if you go to Facebook, you can watch this live.
yeah, you can watch. You can see Adam on
the Mike Nowak
on
show.
the Skype machine. Yeah, go to the Mike Nowak show on Facebook right now. We're streaming live. You're a terrific writer and very engaging writer. And one of the things you bring home in talking about these companies that do this are the emotions involved in it. The people who have lost a loved one and now have to bring somebody in to go through the remains and the goods that are in the home, who are very attached to it, and then the professionals who come in and they can't afford to be attached to any of this. It's all very organized and very quick because this is how you make your money. You got to get it done, get it in the truck. Some of it's going into the garbage, some of it's going into recycling. It's in various places. That's what's pretty amazing. And the thing that really interested me was the company called Book Off.
right.
That is something you say we really don't have here in the United States. Could you explain what Book Off is?
Sure. So Book Off is right now the second largest secondhand company in Japan, which is saying something because they have a massive secondhand industry. It's one of the oldest, and it's certainly the most influential. When it started in the early 1990s, of course, people were buying secondhand stuff in Japan, but it was often through pawn shops or sort of bookstores that were targeted towards the collectible scene. It wasn't for everybody. And Book Off had this great insight that, if we made buying and selling secondhand stuff as attractive as a new retail environment, maybe we can actually get more stuff and also be able to sell stuff and stuff that you create this repurposed secondhand economy. And the story I love about Book Off, and it's such a fascinating insight, is they started out, as the name suggests, just focused on books. And when people would bring them books, they tended to be in pretty bad shape. So they developed a machine that would clean up the books. It would basically shave off the edges. So the turned corners, the yellowed pages, and you turn a used book into one that looks fairly new. And something really interesting happened. As that went on for a few years and people knew about that machine, they started bringing in better stuff. And so before, when we were using the machine a lot in Book Off, they wouldn't pay very much for books. But people figured out, hey, wait a second, they want to sell stuff in really good shape in this really nice, brightly lit store that looks like a Gap. So they started bringing in better and better stuff. And pretty soon, Book Off didn't need that machine anymore. Because people suddenly realized that if they take care of their stuff, they create a secondhand market for it. And that's something that we haven't really done in the U.S. yet. We don't have those really attractive secondhand shops, and we haven't really been able in our retail environment to create this perception that you can actually have a thriving retail industry. Secondhand doesn't mean the death of business. It doesn't mean the death of growth even. It just means a transition to different ways of thinking about it. It can be still attractive, still fun, and still people can make money from it.
All right. right. That's Adam Minter. That's Japan. We've been to the United States. We're going to go to other countries in the world with him. Secondhand travels in the new global garage sale. We'll be right back.
Tom Waits.
Oh, very good. You get a ding on that, but you didn't identify Chewbacca the first time.
I did not, that's for sure.
So we're trying to figure out who has the better voice. Is it Tom Waits
Or Chewbacca.
or Chewbacca? I said Chewbacca.
Chewbacca, tomato,
whatever.
tomato.
You know, I'm a Star Trek fan, not a Star Wars fan, and that's part of the deal anyway. Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We're very pleased, and we've got to let him go, so we've only got a few more minutes to talk to Adam Minter because he's off to the Vikings game in Minneapolis today, and his dad has probably the car's running, the motor's running, isn't it?
Pretty much.
He's going, come on, Adam, get off the phone.
I hope he's sitting in there listening to the show, but maybe he's probably listening to the pregame. Don't you think? So not this show necessarily. And Adam's book, as I said, Secondhand travels in the new global garage sale. Let's go very quickly around the world, starting with the United States, because after you went to Japan and you write about Japan, you talk about the United States and what we do here, specifically Goodwill, which a lot of people look to as the gold standard for reused stuff, for secondhand goods. I was kind of stunned by some of that, and you go to Arizona to some of the area there, the Goodwill region, and they have regions, I guess semi-autonomous regions across the country of Goodwill stores.
Right. Yeah, I spent, for this book, I spent about 3 weeks in Arizona in the territory of the Goodwill of Southern Arizona, which is basically Tucson south to the Mexican border. And that was a very deliberate choice because most of the customers for the Goodwill of Southern Arizona stuff, and it's a lot of stuff, are people coming up from Mexico, crossing the Mexican border, going to Goodwill stores, going to their outlet centers where they sell things by the pound, not by the price tag, purchasing things, and then driving them back to Mexico, about 60 miles, where they're sold to wholesalers or sold in flea markets to people who want durable, used American goods. And without that trade, the Goodwill of Southern Arizona, Tucson in general, would need to find someone else to buy their stuff, and I don't think they would.
Wow. So it's important that Mexico is a kind of partner, although it's sort of an unofficial trade there. I mean, you've got people. You were in a truck. I'm reading about you going back and forth across the border. How closely do they study you and talk to you? The border guards. I mean, how quickly can you go across the border?
Well, I'm not an expert on the border, but I will tell you what goes on with this. The guy who I spent time going back and forth over, he had a card that allowed him to expedite his travel over. That had nothing to do with the secondhand trade. But the interesting thing about secondhand goods into Mexico is they are technically illegal. The new products manufacturers in Mexico do not want to compete against used goods. They consider it competition for their businesses. And yet the Mexican government has always let this trade go on. Nobody has ever been prosecuted so far as anybody knows. So there's really no problem with it, so long as the border guards on either side don't see any problem, any sort of criminal intent on the part of people who are doing this trade. So it's allowed to flow, but it's a very sort of gray market activity that benefits all of us.
So it's not black market, but it's gray market, and it's just security, our law officials looking the other way.
Right. There's no problem with exporting secondhand goods from the United States. The U.S. border guards could care less. I mean, when they run a pickup truck, and I describe going into an X-ray machine in this book, it's a pickup truck X-ray machine, and people theoretically can stay in it. They're not looking for secondhand goods. They're looking for other kinds of contraband that are illegal.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of similar to, I think it was Nigeria. You said it's not legal.
Same situation.
But they look the other way.
In fact, let's do that. I mean, we could talk all day.
He's got a Vikings game to get to.
Yeah, you got a Vikings game to get to, and I'm fascinated by the whole Goodwill thing and their the challenge that they have in.
Sure.
They've got a Walmart across the street, and very quickly, you write. You got a quote from a guy of the Goodwill Industries of Southern Arizona who says, think of it as Walmart headquarters calling a Walmart store manager and saying, you got a truck of product coming. The manager's like, yeah, okay, yeah, I know. And the manager in HQ is like, oh, by the way, we don't know what's in that truck. No one thing in the truck is the same as any other one thing. And oh, by the way, you need to price all of it. And oh, by the way, you definitely need to make a profit selling it.
I'm so glad you pulled that quote out because it's one of my favorites from the book, and it really gets to the heart of the challenge that a charity like Goodwill, which handles more used stuff than any other organization in the United States has, the challenge that they have because they don't know what they're getting every day, and they still have to figure out how to sell it. And so, we don't tend to think of people who work at Goodwill as highly skilled and knowledgeable, but I spent a bunch of time in the sorting rooms where they go through this stuff, and believe me, they know more about us than we do on the basis of the things that we send through Goodwill. The level of expertise when it comes to secondhand clothing and being able to judge whether something is sellable to Goodwill customers just on the basis of touch or looking at a label or having a sense of how recently that fashion was manufactured because the quality of fashion is declining very quickly, the quality of fabric.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary phenomenon.
The fast fashion.
Yeah, it really is. And it's really sophisticated marketing that folks probably are not aware of. They're being manipulated to some degree, but that's what marketing is anyway.
Yep.
Yeah, and you price it low enough, people buy it, and then they're comfortable throwing it away after 5 times.
Right, and if it stays on the racks too long, they get rid of it.
Right.
Just like any store. All right.
Right.
Let's move across to another continent, and Ghana.
So you spend a lot of time talking about Nigeria and Ghana and Europe and the whole flow of secondhand goods there. Particularly electronics and hard goods.
Right. Well, I really wanted to spend time in Africa because I like to break down, people's images of, I like to surprise people. And so one of the things I'd learned a few years ago, spending time in Ghana, and then I followed up with it, is that the electronics we always hear about being, quote unquote, dumped into Africa, and we've all seen the pictures of the stuff being set fire to, it's actually a much more complex trade than what those images and those investigative reports show. The primary reason that electronics are imported into Africa from Europe primarily is because they want to reuse them. And they will import broken electronics, broken televisions, broken phones, and fix them there. And the repair cultures in these countries are very sophisticated because they can't afford a lot of new, and they need to take care of the things that they have. And so you see folks in Africa, in Nigeria, and Benin, and Togo doing the kinds of repairs you would be very hard-pressed to find people doing in Chicago, actually opening up phones and fixing the motherboards in them, the circuit boards in them. Now, that's not to say that the trade is perfect, but that's what drives the stuff into Africa. And when you see these pictures of stuff being burned, that certainly happens, but it's not the freshly imported stuff. It'd be commercial suicide to import something to set fire to it. Why would you do that, even if there's a little bit of gold in there? It doesn't make sense. What you're seeing burned is the stuff that's been used in Africa, in Ghana, for years and years, and now it can't be repaired any longer. But you'd be shocked at how long something is used. I have a chapter in the book that opens with me visiting a man by the name of Ibrahim Al-Hassan, who's a TV repairman in a small town in northern Ghana. And at the time I visited him, he was working on a 35-year-old tube television, fixing it, but not just fixing it. It used to have, when he got it, you would change channels manually. He was installing a remote control unit into it, which tells you how sophisticated his repairs are, but also how long these things can last if they're given to people who want to keep using them. So we might not use a TV in Europe or the US for 30 years, but they will.
And if the parts are available.
And if the parts are available. And that gets to one of the solutions I talk about in this book is right now our electronics manufacturers around the world really want to hold on to the repair business and the parts business. It's a way for them to generate extra revenue. We've seen Apple, for example, do this. They're promoting their Genius Bar. They're promoting themselves as a place where you can get your phone fixed. But if you can only go to the Genius Bar and the authorized repair people, that leaves people in Accra, Ghana or Savalugu, Ghana out in the cold. So there's proposals out there in the United States in particular and in Europe to require the manufacturers to make their parts available so long as they're making them available to their authorized service centers. And that would promote repair and device durability.
We have a minute and a half left. What do you want people what do you want people to get from this book? What's their takeaway? What's your takeaway?
Well, for me, the biggest takeaway was to reduce my consumption. Now, I was never much of a shopper anyway, but when you go around the world and spend time at the donation, I spent days sitting on a stool at the donation door at a Goodwill watching stuff come through. And that makes an impression. You see how much stuff we're throwing away, how much stuff we're wasting. I went to home cleanouts in Japan and the United States. Most of the stuff in our homes really isn't worth anything but our sentiments, our nostalgia. And that made a huge impression. And, so I've started, when I gift people at the holiday season, I'm not buying stuff, I'm buying experiences. Give people gift certificates. Give them things that they can experience with their families, because ultimately nothing lasts forever. Your stuff is ultimately going to be wasted, no matter how well made it is. It's going to be recycled. Some of it's going to end up in a landfill. Let's stop consuming so much of it.
And one of the things you could give is this book. It is called Secondhand Travels in the New Global Garage Sale. It might end in book off, and they might shave the corners of it, but who knows? Adam Minter, thank you so much. We finally got together, and I really appreciate it. You're going to do this again. I'm going to make you come back on the show.
Absolutely.
From across the planet. Okay. And by the way, good luck at the game. Go Vikings. I will tell you that. The Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We'll be right back.
Bye.
You can't tell what this is, can you?
Well, I know what the original song is.
Which original song? There's two. This is a mashup.
No, the Creep.
Yes. There you go. It's a mashup of Creep by Radiohead and Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You. I love this. This is hilarious.
Although I may have to reset my brain after hearing this. Was there an editorial opinion back there?
No.
Mashing up Creep and Mariah Carey? Wait a minute.
It's just funny. And it's by this guy named William Morency. And he's this one has more than 100,000 views, of course.
Well, we'll give William a ding. There you go.
And he's done, it's just, I've got another one that takes a Christmas Carol and does some weird stuff with it. So, welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We were talking to Adam Minter about his new book, Secondhand Travels.
So many things we could talk about out of that book.
Oh, my goodness. We could go on for hours with that. In fact, we want to continue that conversation to the end of the hour here because it brought all kinds of things to mind for us. Now, there were things from the book that you wanted to bring up. I think you should start with that, Peggy.
Yeah, there's a passage where he's going through a resale mall in Minnesota, and he's looking at a lot of old furniture, and he's walking through all the different floors, and he just makes this comment that I'm trying to get the page back because I'm on Kindle here, and he's looking at all of this really heavy duty oak furniture that everybody thinks has big value and nobody really wants for any number of reasons. It's too big, it's too old, it's whatever, it's hard to move.
And that was one of the things he said in the book. There are places in the world when he mentions oak furniture, their eyes light up. And then in Minnesota, they can't get rid of it anymore.
Yeah, and
nobody buys that stuff.
The passage I marked here is the oak furniture that isn't selling now. We cleared Michigan's forests to make that stuff, and now it's on the third floor, meaning nobody wants it. And we cut down all the forests. We cleared all these forests that won't come back as original growth. They're now coming back as, different forests, but all that is now sitting or it's in a landfill.
But the point being, though, that tastes change from generation to generation. There was a whole generation that, 30 years ago was paying big bucks for that oak furniture. Adam writes that millennials don't want it because they're smaller apartments, different styles,
new buildings that are all glass windows, big old furniture.
They don't want to They don't want to move a 200-pound bureau from one to another just because it's made of oak. So they're traveling lighter. So now we've got these things sitting up there. But the taste change also in collectibles. You talk about Star Wars collectibles and
talking about what's popular, what you grew up with as a kid that you might want to buy when you have disposable income.
Even glass. Some people, he was talking about Pyrex at one point. He said he grew up with that. So to him, Pyrex is a collectible. To others, it was stained glass, but that's gone out of fashion. So everything changes constantly in what's a collectible and what's not. And so one day it's a collectible, the next day it's junk, and you can't unload it. And
You can't unload it. Nobody wants it, and yet you hate to get rid of it.
And yet here we are. And I mentioned it earlier that right now,
It's Christmas!
and that's the reaction of a lot of people, and they're running out to the stores because they're terrified they're not going to find the right gift, so they'll buy almost anything as long as they have something to give to somebody. Try something ephemeral, folks. Something, as Adam said, a gift certificate, a good cause. We've done that in the past. We say, we donated this money in your name. Enjoy.
Yep. Looking to our show, seeds, bulbs, things like that for next year.
Right. For your gardening friends, things will get used and put in the ground and last for years, perhaps, if they get put in the ground.
Yeah, just not tchotchkes and not.
But we are a tchotchke society. We are a tchotchke society, and not everybody is.
Yeah.
I don't think you are. I don't think I am. Although, if you came to my house, you'd say, "Oh my gosh, look at." Well, you have. You've been in there, and I've been in your house. This is a lifetime of
or it
stuff,
was
getting stuff.
It
and buying
belonged to your
stuff.
parents or your grandparents, or I would say if you're going to give tchotchkes, buy them secondhand.
And by the way, I found an article in Market Watch that says gift wrap. When you're talking about the holidays and going green a little bit.
Can I use this catalog as gift wrap?
Sure. Use a catalog.
Use all these gardening catalogs that are now starting to flood the mailboxes.
Right.
Gift wrap.
And then they're gone. I mean, then that season's over. And then I threw out some catalogs the other day that were from 2010. I thought, what am I doing with these garden catalogs from 2010? Gift wrap is still a huge business in the United States. Sales of wrapping paper climbed 4% to $8.14 billion last year, according to a recent report by Sundale Research. But sales of reusable gift bags rose faster. So that's a good trend. We do that a lot.
Yeah.
In our household, give a gift in a reusable gift bag, and sometimes gift bags go back and forth for years.
Yeah. Sticker after sticker after sticker on top of them. Yep.
Here are some quick tips. Choose recyclable gift wrap. Papers that contain foil, plastic coating, cellophane, and glitter are not recyclable, according to the American Forest and Paper Association. The rule of thumb is to crumple up the paper. If it stays in a tight ball, it's paper-based and can be recycled. Go with gift bags, as we mentioned. Wrap with fabric.
Use towels.
An ancient craft in Japan is gaining converts elsewhere. 10,000 Villages, a fair trade retail chain, sells gift wrap made from saris that are recycled by artisans in Bangladesh. Recycle it all. TerraCycle, who've been on our show, promises to recycle everything, including ribbons, bows, tissue paper, and wrapping paper with glitter in its Gift Zero Waste box. We might need to talk to them about that. The company sends customers an empty box with a paid return label. Once it's full of gift wrap, customers send it back. TerraCycle says it has processes for even hard-to-recycle products like ribbon, which it uses for insulation or melts into plastic pellets. The company says a medium box is the most popular size for family gatherings. It costs $147. So some people will look at that and go, well, why don't I just throw it out in the garbage? Well, maybe you shouldn't buy it in the first place. Be careful of what you're giving, because you're not just giving the gift, you're giving everything that surrounds the gift.
And then they have to figure out what to do with it when they don't want it.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for our friends listening on the network. Locally, we'll be back, but otherwise, go green or
go home.
Welcome to the second hour of the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. This hour is brought to you by Bartlett Tree Experts. Every tree needs a champion. Go to bartlett.com. Here they are again, Peggy Malecki and Mike Nowak.
All I need is good food to eat and make me healthy, wealthy, wide awake. Lettuce, tomatoes, root and bacon. What about those sweet potatoes? All I need is good food to eat
Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Wow, what a show we have for you today. It's I'm very excited because we have right here in the studio. Well, first of all, we had Adam Minter in the first hour, he's terrific. The book is wonderful. You should pick it up. His book is called Secondhand, Travels in the New Global Garage Sale. But now we have breaking news on the Mike Nowak. That was pretty good too, man. I found that. I just did a little roulette there. I just did a kind of a YouTube roulette. Let's let's bring it back because there's another one here too. Let's try this one. That works pretty well too. All right. Anyway,
We were just pulling it off the UPI feed machine back in the back room.
oh wait, this might be a 5-dinger. In the old days, you had the wire machines back when I was working in Detroit.
Back at WNUR. For me.
Oh, yeah, mine was WWJ Detroit, and we were an all-news station, and they had the ticker tape machines and the wire machines, and they would ding. And 5 dings was a major story. I remember the 5-dinger going off one Saturday afternoon when Elvis died. All right, yeah, and there were a few others like that. In fact, for the longest time, I saved the first notice of that from that machine. I had it in my notes somewhere. Who knows where it is now? But the news we're breaking today is the city of Chicago lost a court case to the people in this room right now, and they are Pete Czosnyka, who's been on the show before. Pete, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Good to be back.
And Jeffrey P. Smith, his attorney. And I have to just say, and good morning, Jeff.
Good morning.
I have to say congratulations, because we've been talking about this issue now for 7 years. And it's been a cash cow for the city, where they go and they fine people for having their lawns overgrown, but sometimes they're not lawns. Sometimes they're plantings that were done on purpose, as in the case of Pete and Noreen Czosnyka, who put native plants in their front yards and got caught in the maw, if I may use that term, of city government and bureaucracy. And most of the time over the years, and some people, significant people in the environmental community, have been ticketed. And I know these people, and many of them just said, "Nah, I'm not going to fight it. It's not worth it." And they pay the $600 fine. And Pete, you said, "No, I'm going to fight this." And when you went into court, I thought, you know what? He's going to lose this, and he's going to end up paying $600, but I wish him well. Mm-hmm. And that did not happen. So congratulations to both of you.
And it happened pretty quickly.
Yeah, it did. I mean, you had like one continuance, and then you came back, and the administrative judge said, okay. So here's what we're going to do on the show today, because I know we're going to break in about a minute. When we come back, we will talk about this case and why it is that you won this, what this means for the future, talk about the law, the ordinance, the so-called weed law in Chicago that has been the bane of natural gardeners' existence now for quite a while. And don't get me wrong, it is useful if it were a law that was written properly. We could use, because you don't want empty fields being overgrown with weeds and grass. My point is, I can tell the difference between overgrown grass and a native planting in about 10 seconds, and so can pretty much anybody else. So that's what we're going to talk about. Again, very pleased to be breaking the story, and apparently we are. The Mike Nowak Show broke this story, and thank you for that. Pete Czosnyka and Jeffrey P. Smith will be talking about Chicago's weed law when we come back. Everybody sing along, please.
Last Christmas I gave you my heart, but the very next day you gave it away. This year, to save me from tears, I gave it to someone special.
Oh, no!
Okay.
it stop.
How's that?
Thank you.
I made it stop. This too?
No, you can keep digging.
Okay. Sorry about that. It's this is the way things roll on the show sometime. Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki, and one more time. Oh my, that's a several dinger
it is.
there. Okay, breaking news: the Mike Nowak Show is telling you for the first time, and you'll probably see this in other outlets as we move on, because I know Jeff and Pete are eager to share the good news, and this is very good news that they beat the city of Chicago in
Sets
this.
a new precedent.
Well, I don't know. I guess that's a question we ask, and we'll get to that. But first of all, Jeff Smith, tell me about your background a little bit. You're a lawyer, but you're also involved in environmental matters to some degree.
I've been a lifelong environmentalist, and I actually went to law school with the idea of helping to save the planet, as it were.
Oh, you silly boy!
You don't get as many chances as you'd like, but I did serve as the general counsel for the Illinois Department of Natural Resources for the last year and a half of the Quinn administration, and a long time ago I was with the city of Chicago's law department. So this was.
So you know about this. You know how this works.
Yeah, a little bit.
Tell us about the process, because, all right, so what happens here and what has happened to a number of people over the years is they decide they're going to put native plants in their yards, all right? And in fact, I first became aware of this in 2012 when Kathy Cummings, who had won in 2004 the Mayor's Landscape Awards for Natural Garden, okay? It was a real award during that time. And then in 2012, she gets slapped with a ticket for the very same garden and said, you need to pay $600. And she fought it. She fought it for years, didn't she, Jeff?
It's a pretty steep fine, so I can't blame somebody. On the other hand, are you going to get a lawyer to, are you going to spend thousands of dollars on legal fees over a $600 fine? It's a tough predicament for anybody who's caught up in that.
And that's how the city wins often, is that people can't afford to have a lawyer in there. They're probably not lawyers themselves, and they don't know what to do, so they say, okay, this is what I'll just pay the fine and let's move on because I can't afford it. I've been involved in legal matters, and that's the hard part, is paying the lawyer, even if you win.
It's true in all sorts of aspects of the law.
Yeah.
There's a lot of low-level cases, as you were, that are important to the average person. $600 to me is still a lot of money.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of attorneys who won't touch anything where you don't have many more zeros than that involved.
All right. So explain to the people, and Pete, we'll get to you in a second here. I'm not going to leave you out of this, but I got the lawyer in the room, and I want to talk to him and ask him about this. And jump in on this, Pete, because you were part of this process. Explain, Jeff, how an administrative hearing works. I mean, Pete, you got a ticket in September for a violation that they say you committed in June. So first of all, there was the delay, and you had no idea this was coming down the pike, did you?
That's correct. Right.
So surprise, on September 4, here's a ticket that you get. A violation was on June 22nd.
That's correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So he's got to go. What are his choices at that point, Jeff?
Well, for things where there's a massive volume of citations, like parking tickets, most people can just mail it in, but most cities and large governments have set up processes whereby you can ask for an administrative hearing. So instead of going to a full-blown circuit court judge, you go before a city or sometimes state hired independent contractor who sits there and serves with the authority.
So this is not
a judge.
A real judge, or is it a real judge?
We approached it like it was a real judge,
Okay.
and they deserve the deference. It's hard work. If you sit through a morning of their cases, you
Sure.
see that it's real volume work. But most people do not contest them because simply of the time and expense and aggravation involved. So if you sit through a morning of the calls in any type of administrative process, you'll see that a lot of them are by default. Essentially, this is treated as an agency decision. It's the administrative hearing officer is adjudicating on behalf of the city of Chicago, in this case, the Department of Streets and Sanitation, or issues a citation.
So you go in and you present your case, and usually it's determined rather quickly, I would think.
We asked for a hearing, and because they're not set up on the morning of the first call to have hearings, if everybody showed up and asked for hearings, the whole system would grind to a halt. You sit there, and they're going through them bang, bang, bang. So they set another date, and we would have gone there, except that Pete's wife, Noreen, had surgery. So.
And so you had to put it off until December 5th.
Yes.
Okay. And so you went back in. Did that help because you had a little more time to prepare, or did you know what your defense was going to be from the get-go?
We pretty much knew what it was going to be, but it's often helpful to have a little additional time.
All right, let's back up just a little bit here, Pete. Tell us about the garden in your yard. You did when you were on the show in October, but this is a garden that you put together on the advice of the city of Chicago, correct?
Yes. So we can start a long time ago. And when my son, who's now 40, was 12, and in the Boy Scouts, we volunteered for the North Branch Prairie Restoration Project for probably a good decade every weekend. And we had a good idea of what that was like. Professionally, I'm a highway engineer. I do safety, erosion control, things that are kind of on the fringes of highway work. But I was the design engineer for 5 miles of bioswales along the tollway up on the tri-state from the Kennedy north all the way up to Lake County. So I was familiar there, and that was about 2010. And in 2010, the late great Department of the Environment ran the Center for Green Technology. You can ring that bell.
Thank you. I didn't want to
over on Sacramento.
I didn't want to
Over
interrupt
on
you.
Sacramento. Yeah. And they ran, they had training classes for the general public and some training classes for professionals, and we went to those classes. And they ended up having a plant sale out of the Center for Green Technology that I'm convinced was set up, was proposed and done so that the Department of the Environment, who was at that time in charge of the city's municipal separate storm sewer system permit, could tell the federal government that the city was acting responsibly, educating the citizens about native plant gardens and rain gardens, and even selling them plants so that these could be installed by citizens around the city.
And so you took their advice, you bought some plants, you put them in your yard, you cultivated them, which we're going to find out is a key word in this. And I've been to your house. I took a photo of your garden. It was late season, and we all know a late season's not quite as pretty, but if you look at the photo that Jeff sent me from earlier in the season, yeah, you see lots of cup plants, you see other things, more, what's the solidago? I can never remember the
Goldenrod?
Thank you.
Is that the bell I fixed?
Yeah, I think that's the one you fixed. And other plants there on the property. And very happy with it. And then suddenly out of the blue in 2019, you get hit with this
Here
fine.
comes the city.
And the garden had been there since 2011. I mean, it's not like I had put it in and they came by right away.
Yeah.
It's been there for a number of years.
Was it a complaint or just a random drive-by?
It doesn't say, but I know in the 45th Ward, there are other community gardens that have plants that are taller than 10 inches with no turf grass anywhere. Mm-hmm. There are individuals who have native plant gardens where the plants are way taller than 10 inches with no turf grass, and they've never gotten a ticket. And so it would seem to me, and it has been suggested to me, that this was kind of a selective and somewhat politically motivated effort.
But who knows? There's no way to prove that.
Right.
Well, even if it wasn't, that's the problem with an ordinance or any kind of law that's vague or where the standards are open to subjectivity, because you could end up, even in a benign enforcement regime, with prosecutions that are arbitrary or random, and in the worst case scenarios are punitive or vindictive.
And there were some vague terms in the city's ordinance.
There still are.
Yeah, I was going to get to that because our friend Charlotte Edelman, who is an author of the Midwestern Native Gardens, Midwestern Native Shrubs and Trees, and Prairie Directory of North America, she's also a lawyer, and I know that she's been in the back and forth correspondence that's been going on about this for years, and I'm talking 7 years now. She's been part of the conversation, and in her words, I will quote her here. She says, "This sloppily drafted, inarticulate, confusing, and misleading ordinance should be repealed." And that's what she says. She wants to repeal the ordinance and replace it with a model ordinance that has been drafted in the Midwest. And she says it's very elegant. Pop it in. It's easy to do. I don't know that that's going to happen. Do you know about this model ordinance, Jeff?
I think this is a real teachable moment. I've taken a look at the model ordinance, and it's doing, it really reduces prosecutions to only noxious weeds. I'm not sure that would cover everything that a city the size of Chicago wants to take on, because nobody wants neglected vacant lots. But what's happened is that basically the vacant lot or completely neglectful homeowner ordinance has found native gardeners and prairie gardeners and wildflower gardens and butterfly gardens getting shoehorned into it, and that's not, I'm pretty sure that was never really the intent.
Yeah, it's lumped it all together from perhaps inspectors who don't know the difference.
So there's a number of ways to approach it. The model ordinance is one way to start, but it might not be the easiest, because governments tend to be more comfortable with amendments to what they've got rather than tearing it completely
Well, she says
down.
that's the problem. All right. She says that the ordinance as crafted now is so vague and unworkable that it really deserves to be junked and replaced. Repeal and replace is what we're talking about here, because part of the ordinance now says, part of the violation you got, Pete, from Code 10-32-050, failure to maintain parkway, quote, weeds on parkway over 10 inches causing rodent problem. Did you have a rodent problem?
No, we didn't have a rodent problem, and just to prove that, we had a pest control firm come over and do an inspection of the front yard and the backyard and the parkway, and there were no rodents.
And you were also cited for violation of Code 7-28-120, parentheses A, weeds in excess of 10 inches. The note reads, weeds on property on average are greater than 10 inches in height. Did they prove that they were more than 10 inches in height? But that's, as in your case, that wasn't the issue, though, was it, Jim?
No, there was no question that things were over 10 inches in height. If you're planting goldenrod or most prairie plants, the way that prairie plants survive is by getting as tall as possible and then trying to flop over and dominate their neighbors. But we chose to tackle head on the question of whether or not these were weeds, and said, look, these are things that were purposely planted. They're intentional. A weed is something that's growing where you don't want it to be. And these are plants where Pete and Noreen wanted them to be, and they were doing quite well.
In fact,
And we bought them from the city.
and you bought them. That's the, I know. You have to keep throwing that in. By the way, the city told us to do this, and then
It's
they
like,
find
what?
us. Then they find us $600.
And it still does. If you go on the city's website, they've got lists of recommended native plants.
Right. All right. When we come back, we'll get into this. I want to talk about the definitions and how you were able to argue this, and also talk about why it might be important to have an ordinance like that, but just don't get people like Pete caught in the machinery of government. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki, and we'll be right back.
The Christmas tree's on fire, it's burning down the house. Flames are getting higher, and I'm trying to put it out. I'm beating it back with a tube sock and a cushion off the couch. The Christmas tree's on fire, and it's burning down the house.
Well, one
I
of my
think you
favorite-
like that song.
I do like that song. It's peppy, don't you think? It gets you in the holiday spirit.
Wait, we needed the.
Oh, there we go. There we go. That's what we needed. Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. We're
See
very,
what you guys get yourselves into.
you thought this was going to be a serious conversation about law and gardening and that sort of thing. Nothing I do is serious here on the show. Well, with their certain exceptions. In the studio, we are very pleased to have Pete Czosnyka, resident of Chicago's Northwest Side, and and the courts did not realize, because you talked about your background before, what they were getting into, because you knew something about what you were doing. You're not just some schlub who came in there and didn't know what he was putting in his yard, and you've had experience planting swales and that sort of thing. And we have Jeff Smith, and they didn't know what they were getting into with Jeff Smith because he's an environmentalist. So it was an unholy duo that came into the courtroom.
And don't forget Noreen. Noreen came along.
And
too.
Noreen, too, yes. That's an unholy trio.
It was pretty whole.
Noreen, I'm sorry. Let's give a ding to Noreen because
Unconventional.
I'd like to think we were on the side of the angels here.
I think you are.
Unconventional trio. Not what they're used to.
One of the things we were talking about during the break was the assembly line justice, and that's a problem in the court system, probably not just in Chicago, but certainly in Chicago, right, Jeff?
Well, everywhere. We're a country of laws, but how does the average person get to enforce their rights? Half the time they don't even know what the laws are or what their rights are, and if they do, how do you find an attorney who can take the case? People are coming out of law school, with $100,000-$200,000 in debt, and they're looking for ways to make a living at it. And Pete and Noreen were fortunate enough that I was willing to take the case on a pro bono basis.
And let's get into a little bit. What I wanted to mention, something else you mentioned, is that you guys sat there that morning before, and this was last Thursday, watching cases come and go, and many of them were had the same issues that you had, were the same violations, and it was like guilty, move on, guilty, move on.
The cases are recorded, and the judge was reading as fast as she could, having these things recorded just to issue the fine after fine after fine, and mostly, to my hearing, for South and West Side neighborhoods.
And most of them were by default. The respondent wasn't even showing up.
And they might not have known about it at this point.
Well, they get served with the citation.
They have to be
allegedly.
served. Yeah.
Well, it comes by mail.
Yes, ours came by mail.
And then if there's no response to that, they go out and post a sign on your property. But
so those folks might have known, unless they're not paying attention to their properties,
Or they're not there.
And that is where a law like this, a better law, can do some good, because, again, as I mentioned earlier, we don't want properties that are out of control. You want people who own the properties to be good stewards and landlords of those properties. The problem is when we get people who deliberately put in these kinds of plants, native plants, as you said, prairie plants like to grow taller. This 10-inch rule is kind of arbitrary, and there are other problems here. Let me read something that you wrote to me, Jeff. You said, and this will be on record now, too. Roll that video, roll that audio tape. The judge's order states that the city did not meet its burden of proof. The judge, before issuing her written order, gave an oral opinion stating that the city established a prima facie case through the inspector's citation. In most cases, that carries the day. However, the judge effectively found that the city's prima facie case was rebutted by the Czosnyka's testimony and evidence showing that the plantings were not weeds and that their gardens, including the parkway, were managed and maintained. The judge also specifically noted that the Czosnykas hired a pest inspector who found no evidence of a rodent problem. We also argued that the city weeds ordinance has no definition of weeds. How can you have a weed ordinance that does not have a definition of weeds, which creates a perilous, and some would say, unconstitutional situation for gardeners? We did argue that under commonly understood meaning, the Czosnyka's garden were not weeds. The judge agreed that that section of the code has no definition, and although this wasn't a construction codes case, she used for guidance part of the construction codes that says all undefined terms in those codes shall be governed by Merriam-Webster's dictionary. With respect to weed, she focused on the dictionary factors of, quote, undesirable and, quote, uncultivated, and found that we had established both that the plantings were desirable and cultivated. That beat the 10-inch weed ordinance. And it seems really simple. Why has nobody done this in 7 years?
For all I know, some people have. These administrative decisions don't normally get reported, but just as a bull market can make anybody look like a financial genius, having great facts and great clients can make a simple country lawyer look brilliant, right?
I don't think you're a simple country lawyer, but that, as you said before, though, you took it head on. It's okay. What are the definitions? And this is where Charlotte Ailman's critique of the law comes into play. You don't even define weeds. One of the things that she's railed about over the years is people say, but I've got native plants. She says, the word native plants doesn't occur in this ordinance. It's irrelevant. It's the words that you used, undesirable and uncultivated, and you proved that they were cultivating it. How was that proven, by the way?
Direct testimony. We asked Pete and
Noreen. Noreen does most of the maintenance along with a young man from the neighborhood, and they'll work together out there. There's 12 bags of whatever we've taken out since I was on the radio here with you guys last, sitting in the garage waiting for a pickup from Streets and Sand.
And I would presume it's desirable because the plants were on the list of what you got from the city.
And we see plenty of butterflies and birds and grasshoppers and
Yeah,
whatever else that are out there.
Yeah,
also.
but even from the standpoint of what the city says, plant this. It's desirable.
Well, we brought in a list of
Yeah.
all the plants that were there. I don't know how many other people have done that.
I bet other people
Yeah.
have done that. I would be that would be the first thing that I would do. I would, and I would probably use circles and arrows and, as Arlo Guthrie says,
8 by 10.
and with a picture
by
and a
10 glossy
description on the back of
pictures.
each one, showing each one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we got down to the point of asking, for example, I asked Noreen, what tools do you use? How often do you go out and lop and prune? Do you deadhead? Do you thin? Pete was able to testify the depth of the swale that he created. So we had a fair amount of detail. We were loaded for bear.
Good for you.
So, and we've got a question which probably leads into where you're going with some of this.
All right, take the question.
Will this win have an effect on future cases, or could it prompt a change in the ordinance itself?
Yes to the second part, and probably not so much to the first part, except to the extent that the city is now aware that they can lose these cases. I would hope that a benevolent administration would pass the word down to Streets and Sand. Hey, let's lay off the native gardeners. But really, the opportunities for this teachable moment to transform itself into a change in law.
And I will mention, as you're saying that, still waiting for the city of Chicago to reinstate the Department of the Environment, still waiting for the city of Chicago to address this at all. I have seen nothing coming out of City Hall regarding this. You guys went to the administrative level and won, but I'm not hearing any direction. I'm hearing crickets, and they're not coming from your garden, Pete, all right? I'm hearing crickets from the new administration in terms of environmental matters, and I'm getting a little nervous and a little testy about it on the radio. I this would be a good place to maybe set some precedent. I don't know.
Mayor Lightfoot has a big lift, and like
I know.
Stephen Covey says, big rocks first.
Yeah.
So
I guess. Well, you're very being what would be the word? Sanguine about it? Not sanguine, but generous. You're being, giving her the benefit of the doubt. I'm the radio guy. I'm not giving the benefit of the doubt. Before we go, though, one thing that our friend Charlotte said, if this happens to you, be sure to keep your garden landscape, regardless of its so-called average height, maintained and managed, and be prepared to prove it in court with testimony, records showing maintenance, and with photographs, receipts, and witnesses. Second, hire a lawyer before you go to court. Don't wait until you lose the case. Follow your lawyer's advice. Don't get sidetracked by matters that, though important in the big picture, are not relevant to winning your case. Do you agree with that, Jeff?
You shouldn't have to hire a lawyer to be a gardener.
All right. With those words of wisdom, I'm going to thank Jeffrey P. Smith and Pete Czosnyka. Congratulations on your victory in court. It's the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Rick DeMaio weather is next.
And how the reindeer loved them as they shouted out with me. You should have heard them. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer. You're down in history.
Oh, yeah. Welcome back
I'm Rudolph.
with Rudolph. Thank you, Ray Charles. Welcome back to the Mike Nowak Show with Peggy Malecki. Before we get to Rick DeMaio, very quickly, Jeff Smith and Pete Czosnyka are still in the studio because, Jeff, you said something. You're working on a similar law in Evanston.
Well, actually, this was going on a couple of years ago where I'm on the board of a group called Citizens Greener Evanston. We have a subgroup called Natural Habitat. There's a woman named Leslie Shadd who spearheaded a number of great initiatives in Evanston. One of them was to try and get the city to revise its, quote, noxious weed law because, again, you have a lot of things that were considered pests back when we were a more agricultural state, but that are
like milkweed.
Like milkweed,
and
exactly.
you got milkweed removed from the noxious weed list.
That's correct.
That's great. And Pete said something brilliant. He said, you had an idea for the city of Chicago, and if the Lori Lightfoot administration is listening, here it is.
The city should come along and just provide a template, a series of templates for parkways or for front gardens using their own approved native plant lists. And then they could provide some structure. They could provide some blooming at different times of the year, and they could even register them with the Streets and Sanitation Department so that you would know that this was not a inappropriate place.
Quickly, yes.
If you had a 15 by 15 plot in even just 100 households in every ward, that would equate to 25 acres of prairie having been restored in the city of Chicago, which would be outstanding.
City of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, give me a call. We'll talk about this. All right, let's go to our meteorologist, Rick DeMaio. Good morning, Rick.
Yes, good morning, Mike.
Good morning.
As you speak to me, good morning, Peg. Good morning, Mike. As you hear my voice, I'm actually crossing the mighty Mississippi.
Wow.
Wow.
Where you head? Last week you were out east, now you're out west?
Yep, and through the amazing travel that I like to do every once in a while, get out and about. Spent the weekend in Dubuque, Iowa, which is a really beautiful city, very up and coming. Spent yesterday kind of traipsing around in the gorgeous town of Galena. And what's really interesting out here is people are still talking about the wetness of the spring, the fact that the farmers are still harvesting their corn in some of the fields because they weren't able to get it in September, October, and November, and the fact that through the first 11 months of the year, the city and the airport of Dubuque, Iowa, is now up to 54 inches of rain.
Wow.
And that's about 15 inches, above normal, Peg. And there's already some talk about what they might have to be doing to this area come March, April, and May of 2020 because everything has earmarks of repeating what happened back in 1993 when we had the record flood. It wasn't so much the rain that we had that spring and summer, but it was the rain and snow that we had in the fall. In addition to that, the price of hay for farm animals is through the roof because of the hay crop. I think they may have only gotten 2 cuttings in as opposed to 3. So whenever I come out here, I always like to talk about, and in some instances 4 cuttings, but I always like to talk to the locals, kind of get their feeling about what's going on. I don't like to really talk about climate change, but man, staying in a hotel in Dubuque, Iowa, we were inundated with political ads because, as you all know, the first primary is in Iowa, and it almost seems like the primary is going to be next weekend. It's that much saturated with Democratic ads.
Oh, I'm so glad I don't live in Iowa. Oh, just so glad. And
no, it's a pretty state. It's pretty. Dubuque is very cosmopolitan. It's not as farmy as you may think.
No.
I think that
From the ad perspective.
I was just talking about the ads. I mean, otherwise, Iowa's fine.
Get ready for that to happen in Illinois when it gets close to that. But I'm sure these people are being. I'm sure they're being inundated a lot more than most other states, obviously, because they're number one on the list.
Yeah. And I have to tell you that your forecast, once again, has been spot on, really, in Chicago.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, there's been nothing going on. It's just been sort of, we're just sitting here I look out in my back porch, every morning it's 40 degrees. Nothing seems to change.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing. And I just sent you guys out a new one about a half hour ago. Sorry for the delay. I was busy with other things. But we literally are in a near dry pattern, a near normal pattern, I should say, near temperature-wise, pretty much for the next 7 to 10 days. Every once in a while, you'll get this little bit of a dip of Arctic air as we'll get into Monday night, into Tuesday and Wednesday. But by and large, this has been a very dry pattern, one that we needed. And another thing that was interesting, driving west on 20 from Rockford up to Galena and Dubuque, every area where you had the possibility of like marshes and wetlands and the headwaters of the Kishwaukee River, they're all flooded. And you look at that and you go, that's not supposed to be that way in December. But the fact that they had so much rain and then so much snow, and then it all melted with that rain we had last week, things are not freezing and sublimating back into the atmosphere they would normally do in the wintertime. And we've talked about this before. So much of the snow that we're getting that used to sit on the ground and basically shrink back into the atmosphere is melting and going back into the soil. And I think that's another thing that needs to be considered with the changing climate is not so much that we might be getting, less snow on the ground for a longer period of time. That snow is basically transforming into liquid, and the people who live out here, they're the first ones who see it, and they're going to be on the defense come March and April of next year. That'll be something to watch as well for the long term.
This is something that we will keep in mind for next spring and as we progress into the winter.
I was going to say, even up in southeast Lake County, I was driving around a little bit yesterday, a couple places I had to go. There's so much standing water at the side of the road, by the rivers.
Yep.
Yeah. All right.
But you know what, Pig? Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, no. Make it quick, and then we'll need to get to a forecast here.
I think it also kind of shows you that we still don't know that much about nature because we were all talking about how bad the mosquitoes were going to be last year. They were early on, and then we got into a hot, dry spell, and they were gone. So, go figure that part there. All right, so partly to mostly cloudy, near 40 today, near 45 to 50 tomorrow with rain likely. Rain passes off to the east, much colder during the day on Tuesday with temperatures in the 20s for Tuesday and Wednesday, and back up to the 30s for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of next week. Not an inch of snow around here for the next 7 days, guys.
Yeah, I'm looking at your PowerPoint, and the very first page says, no significant weather events expected. All right. Enjoy your travels and do it safely, okay, Rick?
Will do. Take care, guys.
All right, you too. Thanks to everybody on the show today. Adam Minter, author of Secondhand, travels in the new global garage sale. And, of course, our victorious court case folks, Pete Czosnyka, Jeffrey Smith, and, of course, Noreen, who was not able to be here. Congratulations. What we say to me is...
It's Christmas!
Until next time, go green or...
Go home.
Stadler?
Yeah, what?
Is that it?
Yes, it's over. How'd you like it?
I don't know. I slept through the whole thing.
Well, you didn't miss much.